Alexander Winters stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the city pulse with life 40 stories below. At 37, he had built an empire that most men could only dream of. Winters Industries sprawled across 3 continents, employing thousands. Yet the view before him felt hollow, a reminder of everything success couldn't buy. It had been 18 months since Caroline's death. 18 months since the car accident that shattered his world into a million irreparable pieces. The grief counselor had promised it would get easier with time, but Alexander had learned that grief didn't diminish. It merely changed shape, becoming something you carried rather than something that consumed you. The real weight, though, wasn't his own sorrow. It was watching his 3-year-old daughter, Emma, navigate a world without her mother. The little girl with Caroline's green eyes and infectious laugh had grown quieter, more withdrawn. She clutched her stuffed rabbit everywhere, a security blanket against the absence that permeated their sprawling mansion. They'd gone through 4 nannies in the past year. Each one was highly qualified, impeccably referenced, and utterly unable to reach Emma. The child would obey mechanically, eat without enthusiasm, and retreat into herself the moment she was left alone. Alexander had tried everything: child psychologists, play therapy, even reducing his work hours to spend more time at home. Nothing seemed to break through the wall Emma had built around her heart. Mrs. Patterson, his longtime housekeeper, had finally convinced him to try a different approach. "What Emma needs isn't another nanny," she'd said gently. "She needs someone with a mother's heart, not just a professional's credentials." That's how Elena Martinez came into their lives on a gray Tuesday morning in October. Alexander had been skeptical when Mrs. Patterson introduced the 28-year-old woman in their foyer. Elena was younger than the previous nannies, with warm brown eyes and an openness in her expression that seemed almost naive for someone applying to work in a billionaire's household. "Mr. Winters," she'd said, extending her hand with quiet confidence. "Thank you for this opportunity." Her file was thin compared to the others. No fancy degrees in child development, no experience with elite families. She'd worked at a community daycare in Queens, helped raise her younger siblings after her parents divorced, and had references that spoke more to her character than her qualifications. In any other circumstance, Alexander would have dismissed her immediately. But something in Mrs. Patterson's knowing look made him pause. And when Elena knelt down to Emma's level, not forcing interaction but simply offering a gentle smile, he saw his daughter's grip on her rabbit loosen ever so slightly. "Hello, Emma," Elena had said softly. "That's a beautiful rabbit. Does he have a name?" Emma had stared at her for a long moment, then whispered, "Hoppy." It was the first time in weeks his daughter had spoken to a stranger without prompting. Alexander had hired her on the spot, ignoring the voice in his head that warned against making decisions based on hope rather than logic. He'd given hope up as a luxury he couldn't afford, but watching Elena follow Emma toward the playroom, matching the little girl's tentative steps, he felt something stir in his chest that might have been its distant cousin. The first week was an adjustment. Alexander maintained his distance, observing Elena's interactions with Emma through the lens of a protective father who'd learned that trust was earned slowly. He watched as Elena approached each day with patience that seemed infinite. She didn't push Emma to talk or play or engage. Instead, she simply existed alongside her, reading books aloud without requiring the child to listen, drawing pictures that she left casually within Emma's reach, humming old lullabies while she folded laundry. By the 3rd day, Emma had started sitting closer during story time. By the 5th, she'd picked up one of Elena's drawings and added her own careful crayon marks. By the end of the first week, Alexander came home to find his daughter actually laughing, a sound he'd almost forgotten, as Elena pretended to be a clumsy princess who kept tripping over her own feet. "You're good with her," he'd said that evening after Emma was in bed, finding Elena in the kitchen preparing the next day's lunch. Elena had looked up, surprise flickering across her face. "She's a special little girl, Mr. Winters. She just needed someone to meet her where she is, not where we think she should be." There was wisdom in those words that belied her age, and Alexander found himself curious about the woman who'd accomplished in days what others couldn't manage in months. But he'd pushed the curiosity aside, reminding himself that Elena was an employee, nothing more. He'd learned the hard way that letting people too close meant giving them the power to leave, and he wasn't sure his heart, or Emma's, could survive another abandonment. What Alexander didn't know yet was that Elena carried her own grief, her own carefully constructed walls. She'd lost someone too, though she never spoke of it, and in Emma's searching eyes, she saw a reflection of her own childhood loneliness. When she tucked the little girl in each night and whispered, "You're safe, sweet girl, and you're so loved," she was making a promise not just to Emma, but to the wounded child she herself had once been. In that house of marble and money, two broken hearts were beginning to recognize each other. And somewhere in the spaces between caution and connection, the foundations of something transformative were being quietly laid. 3 months passed like water finding its course, sometimes rushing, sometimes still, but always moving forward. The Winters mansion, which had felt like a mausoleum of memories, began to pulse with something that resembled life again. The change was subtle at first, noticed only by those who'd known the depths of the silence that came before. Elena had transformed Emma's routine without really changing it at all. They still woke at 7, still had breakfast in the sunny breakfast nook, still followed the structured schedule that gave Emma the security she craved. But now there was music during breakfast, sometimes classical, sometimes silly songs that made Emma giggle into her oatmeal. There were flowers from the garden arranged in child-height vases throughout the house, placed there by small hands that Elena guided with gentle patience. "Every living thing needs beauty," Elena had explained to Emma one morning as they picked daisies from the garden. "It reminds us that the world is full of good things, even when we're sad." Emma had nodded solemnly, then asked, "Were you sad too, Lena?" It was the first personal question the child had asked, and Elena had felt her throat tighten. She'd knelt in the grass, heedless of the dirt on her jeans, and looked into those searching green eyes. "Yes, sweet girl. I was very sad once. But do you know what I learned? Sadness doesn't last forever if we let people help carry it with us. Like Hoppy helps me? Exactly like that. Except sometimes the help comes from people who care about us." Emma had considered this, then carefully placed a daisy behind Elena's ear. "You can help carry mine, and I'll help carry yours." In that moment, something fundamental shifted. Elena felt it in the sudden burning behind her eyes, in the way her heart seemed to expand beyond the careful boundaries she'd constructed. This wasn't just a job anymore, if it ever truly had been. This little girl, with her carefully guarded heart and her fierce capacity for love, had become something precious beyond measure. Alexander noticed the change too. He'd started coming home earlier, drawn by curiosity at first, wanting to understand what magic Elena possessed that his money couldn't buy. What he found was something both simple and profound. Elena loved his daughter. Not with the professional affection of a caregiver, but with the fierce, unconditional love that he'd thought only a parent could possess. He'd see them in the library, Elena reading stories with different voices for each character, while Emma's eyes shone with delight. He'd hear them in the music room, where Elena was teaching Emma simple songs on the piano despite admitting she was terribly out of practice. He'd find them in the kitchen, making elaborate pretend meals from play food, Elena praising each imaginary dish as if it were a masterpiece. But it was the quiet moments that struck him most deeply. The way Elena would absent-mindedly stroke Emma's hair while they watched nature documentaries. The way she'd kneel to Emma's level for every conversation, making herself small so Emma could feel big. The way she'd celebrate the tiniest victories, a full plate at dinner, a nightmare soothed, a new word learned, as if each one were a miracle. One evening, Alexander stood in the doorway of Emma's room during bedtime, watching Elena tuck his daughter in. It was a routine he'd observed countless times, but tonight something about it caught in his chest. "Tell me the star story," Emma requested, her voice sleepy but insistent. Elena smiled and sat on the edge of the bed. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who loved the stars. She would sit by her window every night and make wishes on them. "Do you know what she wished for?" "What?" Emma asked, though Alexander suspected she'd heard this story before. She wished that everyone who felt sad or lonely could see the stars and remember that they're never truly alone. Because the same stars shine on all of us, connecting us across all the distances in the world. Even to heaven? Emma's voice was small. Elena's hand found Emma's, her thumb tracing gentle circles on the child's palm. Especially to heaven. Your mama can see the same stars you can, sweet girl. And every time you look up at them, it's like sending her a little hello. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't the desperate, frightened tears Alexander had grown accustomed to. These were gentler, part of healing rather than breaking. Do you think she knows I still love her? I know she does, Elena said with quiet certainty. Love doesn't stop just because someone isn't here anymore. It changes, like how water can be ice or steam, but it's still water. Your love for your mama is still there, still real, still connecting you to her. Alexander had to turn away, his own eyes burning. No therapist, no well-meaning friend, no grief counselor had been able to give Emma that peace. But Elena, with her simple wisdom and her open heart, had given his daughter permission to love both her lost mother and her own future. Later that night, after Emma was asleep, Alexander found Elena in the kitchen making tea. She looked up, startled by his presence. Mr. Winters. I didn't hear you come in. Can I get you anything? Elena, he said, and something in his voice made her still. What you said to Emma tonight about love not stopping. Thank you. She's been carrying so much guilt about moving forward, about smiling again. I think you just gave her something I couldn't. Elena set down her mug, her expression thoughtful. Children understand love more purely than we do, I think. They haven't learned yet that it's supposed to be complicated. Emma doesn't need permission to heal, Mr. Winters. She just needs to know that healing doesn't mean forgetting. How did you get so wise? The question escaped before he could think better of it, too personal for the professional distance he'd tried to maintain. A shadow crossed Elena's face. Loss teaches us things we never wanted to learn. I lost my little brother when I was 19, he was only 7. For years, I felt guilty every time I laughed or felt joy, like I was betraying his memory. Someone once told me that the best way to honor the people we've lost is to live fully, to love completely, because that's what they would want for us. I try to remember that. The revelation hung in the air between them, a bridge across the careful distance they'd maintained. Alexander saw Elena differently then, not just as his daughter's caregiver, but as someone who'd walked through the same fire he had and emerged with compassion instead of bitterness. I'm sorry, he said quietly. That's an unbearable loss. So is yours, Elena replied. But Emma is lucky. She has a father who loves her enough to let her grieve, and to grieve alongside her. That's not nothing, Mr. Winters. The moment stretched, waited with things unsaid, until Elena cleared her throat and stepped back. I should finish preparing tomorrow's activities. Good night, Mr. Winters. Good night, Elena. And call me Alexander. Please. After she left, Alexander stood in the quiet kitchen, staring at the cup of tea she'd abandoned. Something was shifting in his carefully ordered world, and for the first time since Caroline's death, he wasn't sure if he wanted to resist it. As winter settled over the city, the Winters household found its rhythm. Snow blanketed the gardens where Elena and Emma had picked flowers, transforming the landscape into something magical and new. Inside, warmth bloomed in ways that had nothing to do with the heating system Alexander's fortune maintained. Elena had been with them for 6 months now, and Emma had blossomed under her care in ways that seemed miraculous. The withdrawn, silent child had been replaced by a little girl who chattered constantly, who asked endless questions about everything from why snowflakes were different shapes to whether butterflies remembered being caterpillars. She painted with wild abandon, her careful coloring inside the lines replaced by joyful explosions of color that Elena proudly displayed on the refrigerator like a gallery. But Alexander had begun to notice something troubling. His household staff, particularly Mrs. Patterson's assistant, Margaret, and the head of security, James, had started treating Elena differently. There was a coolness in their interactions, a subtle exclusion from the staff's informal gatherings. He'd heard whispered conversations that stopped when he approached, seen knowing looks exchanged when Elena entered a room. The tension came to a head one February morning. Alexander had stayed home to prepare for a crucial video conference when he heard raised voices in the hallway outside his study. He opened the door to find Margaret confronting Elena near the stairs. "It's not appropriate," Margaret was saying, her voice sharp with disapproval. "You're the help, Elena, not family. You're overstepping." Elena stood very still, her arms wrapped around herself. "I don't understand what I've done wrong. Don't play innocent. Everyone can see the way you look at Mr. Winters, the way you've positioned yourself with Emma. Do you think we're blind? You're trying to replace Mrs. Winters, and it's disgusting." The color drained from Elena's face. "That's not. I would never." "Ladies." Alexander's voice cut through the confrontation like ice. Both women turned to him, Margaret looking righteous, Elena looking stricken. "Margaret, you're dismissed. Pack your things and leave immediately. Mrs. Patterson will arrange your final paycheck." Margaret's mouth fell open. "But, Mr. Winters, I was only trying to protect. You were creating a hostile work environment. You're done here. Leave now, or I'll have security escort you out." After Margaret left, sputtering protests, Alexander turned to Elena. She was trembling, tears threatening to spill over. "My office. Now." The command came out harsher than he'd intended, and he saw Elena flinch. She followed him silently, keeping her eyes downcast. Once the door closed behind them, Alexander gestured to a chair, but she remained standing. "Mr. Winters, I can explain." "Alexander," he corrected automatically. "And you don't need to explain." Margaret was out of line, and her behavior was unacceptable. But she wasn't entirely wrong. Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. "I have overstepped. I've let myself care too much, get too close. I know there are boundaries that should exist between employer and employee, and I've blurred them. If you want me to leave." "Elena, stop." Alexander moved around his desk, closing the distance between them. "Is that what you think? That I'm going to fire you because you've loved my daughter too well? I don't want to cause problems in your household. And I certainly never wanted anyone to think I was trying to replace." She couldn't finish the sentence. Alexander sighed, running a hand through his hair. This conversation was veering into territory he'd been avoiding for months, feelings he'd refused to examine too closely. The truth is, the staff aren't entirely wrong about something changing, but it's not what they think. Elena finally looked up at him, confusion in her eyes. "Emma isn't the only one who's been healing," Alexander continued carefully. "For the first time since Caroline died, I don't feel like I'm drowning. This house doesn't feel like a tomb anymore. And that's because of you, because of the light you've brought into our lives." "Mr. Winters, Alexander, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. I'm just trying to explain that whatever rumors are circulating, whatever assumptions people are making, they're based on changes they've observed. I come home earlier now. I smile more. I've stopped treating this house like a hotel and started actually living here again. But that's on me, not you. You've done nothing wrong." Elena hugged herself tighter. "I care about Emma so much. More than I probably should, professionally speaking. She feels like my own daughter. And I know that's not right, that she's not mine, that I'm just what? Just the person who's been there for her every day? Just the one who taught her it's okay to laugh again, to love again? Just the one who makes her feel safe and cherished." Alexander's voice softened. "Elena, Emma hasn't had a mother figure in her life since Caroline died. The other nannies were competent, but they were just doing a job. You've given her something infinitely more precious. You've given her your heart." A tear slipped down Elena's cheek. "I'm scared, Alexander. I'm scared because I know this arrangement is temporary. Children grow up, they don't need nannies forever, and when that day comes, I don't know how I'll walk away from her. I've already lost one child I loved. I don't think I can survive losing another." The confession hung in the air, raw and honest. Alexander, felt something crack open in his chest. He'd been so focused on protecting himself and Emma from further loss that he hadn't considered Elena might be just as vulnerable. "Then don't," he said quietly. Elena's head snapped up. "What?" "Don't walk away."
"Stay."
"Not as an employee, but as..." He paused, trying to find words for something he'd been afraid to name. "As part of our family." "I don't understand." Alexander took a breath, stepping into uncertain territory. "I'm not asking you to be Caroline. No one could be, and no one should try. But somewhere along the way, you've become essential to us. To Emma, yes, but to me too. I look forward to coming home now, to hearing about Emma's day, to the sound of your laughter in the hallways. I find myself thinking of things I want to tell you, jokes I want to share, questions I want to ask." "Alexander." Elena's voice was thick with emotion. "I'm not proposing anything dramatic," he continued quickly. "I'm just saying that whatever this is between us, this friendship, this connection, it matters. And I don't want to lose it because of fear or propriety or what the staff might think." Elena wiped her eyes, a small smile breaking through. Margaret would be appalled. Margaret was a judgmental busybody who had no place in this household. Mrs. Patterson, on the other hand, told me 3 months ago that hiring you was the best decision I'd made since Emma was born. She did.
She did.
She also said, and I quote, "That girl has a mother's heart, and you'd be a fool not to recognize the gift you've been given." Elena laughed, the sound watery but genuine. "Mrs. Patterson is a very wise woman."
"She is."
"And she's right. You are a gift, Elena. To Emma, certainly, but also to me. You've reminded me that it's possible to live again, not just exist." The words settled between them, changing the air somehow. Elena looked at Alexander with an expression he couldn't quite read, gratitude mixed with something deeper, more complex. "Can I tell you something?" she asked softly. "Anything." "When I took this job, I was running from my own grief. I thought that caring for someone else's child would be easier than facing what I'd lost. But Emma didn't let me hide. She demanded I show up fully, bring all of myself, including the broken parts. And in healing her, I've been healing myself. This family has given me as much as I've given you." Alexander felt the truth of her words in his bones. They were all wounded souls who'd somehow found each other, creating something new from the fragments of their broken hearts. "Then we'll move forward together," he said. "All 3 of us, figuring it out as we go. No more worrying about boundaries or what people think. Emma needs both of us, and maybe we need each other too." Elena nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. But these were the good kind, the kind that came from hope rather than despair. "Thank you for trusting me with her. With both of you. The trust is mutual, Elena. Never doubt that." As she left his office, Alexander returned to his desk, but found himself unable to focus on work. Something fundamental had shifted in that conversation. They'd acknowledged what had been growing between them. Not romance, not yet, but something deeper. A recognition of souls who understood loss, who chose connection despite the risk of future pain, who were brave enough to build something new on the foundations of their grief. Outside his window, snow continued to fall, covering the old world in white. Inside, the careful dance of boundaries had ended, replaced by something more honest, more vulnerable, and infinitely more real. Spring arrived with a vengeance, turning the mansion's gardens into a riot of color. Emma celebrated her 4th birthday with a party that Elena had planned with meticulous care, a garden fairy theme complete with butterfly wings for every guest and a treasure hunt that had the children squealing with delight. Alexander watched from the terrace as Elena orchestrated the chaos with effortless grace, her laughter ringing out across the lawn as she helped Emma blow out her candles. "Make a wish, sweet girl," Elena called, studying Emma's small shoulders as the little girl screwed her eyes shut in concentration. When Emma opened her eyes, she looked directly at Elena and grinned, a look of such pure joy that Alexander felt his chest tighten. His daughter was happy again. Truly, genuinely happy in a way he'd feared might never return. But happiness, Alexander had learned, could be fragile. It started with small things, a misplaced file in his office, a confidential document that appeared on his desk when it should have been locked away. Then his sister Victoria began calling more frequently, her questions pointed and probing. How was Emma? Who was caring for her these days? Had Alexander done thorough background checks on his household staff? He'd brushed off her concerns, chalking them up to Victoria's controlling nature. His older sister had never approved of anything he did, from his career choices to his marriage to Caroline. She'd been even more critical after Caroline's death, suggesting he send Emma to boarding school in Switzerland for stability. But when Victoria showed up unannounced one Saturday in April, Alexander knew something was wrong. "We need to talk," she said, sweeping into his study without invitation. "About your domestic situation." "Victoria, if this is about Emma again, it's about that woman you've allowed into your home." Victoria dropped a folder on his desk. "Elena Martinez. Do you have any idea who she really is?" Alexander felt ice flood his veins. "What are you talking about?" "I had her investigated. Something about her didn't sit right with me, so I hired the best private investigator money could buy." Victoria's smile was sharp. "Your precious nanny isn't who she claims to be." With trembling hands, Alexander opened the folder. Inside were photos, documents, articles, a story he couldn't process fast enough. "Elena Martinez had a different name 7 years ago," Victoria said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Elena Vargas. She was married to a man named Miguel Martinez, a man with connections to organized crime. When he was killed in a gang shooting, the investigation revealed money laundering, drug trafficking, all sorts of nasty business. Elena was questioned extensively." "Questioned doesn't mean guilty," Alexander said, his voice tight. "She changed her name, Alexander. She fled across the country, took her brother with her, and built a completely new identity. The authorities never charged her with anything, but that's because they couldn't prove her involvement. Do you really want someone with that past around your daughter?" Alexander stared at the documents, his mind reeling. Bank statements showing large transfers. Police reports with Elena's name, her old name, marked as a person of interest. Photos of her much younger, standing next to a man with dead eyes and expensive clothes. "This doesn't make sense," he said. "Elena told me her brother died when she was 19. "Another lie," Victoria interrupted. "Her brother is alive and well, living in California. She's been sending him money every month. Money that comes from the generous salary you pay her." The implications were damning. Elena had lied about her past, about her identity, about fundamental aspects of her life. She'd brought those lies into his home, into his daughter's life. "I want her gone," Victoria said.
Today. Now.
"I've already contacted several agencies that can provide properly vetted nannies. You can have someone here by this evening." Alexander's mind was spinning. Part of him wanted to deny everything, to find innocent explanations for each damning piece of evidence. But another part, the part that had been wounded by loss and betrayal, whispered that he'd been a fool to trust so completely, to let someone so deep into their lives without truly knowing them. "I need to think," he managed. "What's there to think about? She's a liar and possibly a criminal. Emma is in danger every moment that woman remains in this house. Get out, Victoria." His sister's eyes widened. "Alexander." "I said get out. I'll handle this my way." After Victoria left, Alexander sat in his study for hours, the folder open before him like a wound. He tried to reconcile the woman in these documents with the Elena he knew, the one who sang to Emma at bedtime, who cried at children's movies, who'd brought light back into their lives. By the time evening fell, he'd made his decision. He found Elena in the kitchen, preparing Emma's dinner. She looked up with a smile that died when she saw his face. "Alexander? What's wrong?" "We need to talk." "Emma's room."
Now.
The walk up the stairs felt like a funeral march. In Emma's room, with his daughter playing at a neighbor's house for a sleepover, Alexander handed Elena the folder, without preamble. He watched the color drain from her face as she opened it, watched her hands begin to shake, watched tears spill over as she paged through the evidence of her hidden past. "I can explain," she whispered. "You lied to me." Alexander's voice was cold, a defense against the hurt threatening to overwhelm him. About everything. Your name, your past, your brother's death, all lies. My brother did die, Elena said desperately.
Just not the way I said.
Miguel, my husband, killed him. It was supposed to be a warning to me, to keep me quiet about what I'd learned about his business. Antonio was 7 years old, Alexander. 7. And Miguel murdered him because I'd found evidence of what he was doing and threatened to go to the police. The words hit Alexander like physical blows. He'd been prepared for many explanations, but not this. The brother sending money to, that's Antonio Jr., my nephew. Elena continued, words tumbling out in a rush. I got him out before Miguel could hurt him too. I changed our names, moved us across the country, built a new life. I couldn't tell you because the fewer people who knew, the safer Antonio would be. Miguel's associates are still out there, and they have long memories. You brought danger into my home. Around my daughter. No. Elena's voice broke. I've been careful. So careful. No one from my past knows where I am. I changed everything. My appearance, my name, my entire life. I would never put Emma at risk. Never. But you lied. About fundamental things. How can I trust anything you've told me? Elena's face crumpled. Because everything else was real. My love for Emma, my feelings for this family, my grief over losing a child. All of that was true. The only thing I lied about was my past, and I did it to protect the people I love. I need you to leave, Alexander said, the words tasting like ash. Please, Elena begged. Please don't do this. Emma needs. What Emma needs is stability and safety. What she doesn't need is someone who lies to us, who brings her past trauma into our home. He held up a hand when Elena tried to speak. I'll give you a month's severance and excellent references, minus any mention of your real identity. But you need to be gone by tonight. Let me say goodbye to Emma. Please, just let me explain to her. Absolutely not. You'll pack your things and leave now. Emma will be told you had a family emergency. She doesn't need to know the truth. The truth is that I love her. Elena's voice rose, desperate. I love her like she's my own daughter. You can't just erase me from her life like I never existed. Watch me. Alexander moved to the door, holding it open. Mrs. Patterson will help you pack. I want you gone within the hour. Elena stood frozen, the folder still clutched in her shaking hands. You're making a mistake. I know it doesn't look good, but if you just listen. I'm done listening to your lies. Goodbye, Elena. The cruelty in his voice was intentional, a wall against the part of him that wanted to gather her close and promise everything would be okay. But he couldn't afford that weakness. Not when Emma's safety might be at stake. Not when he'd already been betrayed once by letting someone too close. Elena walked past him, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. At the door, she turned back. When Emma asks for me, and she will, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her that loving her was the most real thing I've ever done. And tell her that the stars still connect us, no matter where I am. Then she was gone, leaving Alexander alone in his daughter's room, surrounded by the artwork Elena had helped create, the books they'd read together, the countless small touches that marked her presence in their lives. He'd done the right thing, he told himself. Protected his daughter from potential danger. Removed a threat before it could materialize. So, why did it feel like he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life? Outside, spring rain began to fall, washing away the remnants of the garden party's joy. Inside, Alexander sat on Emma's bed, holding one of the fairy wings from the celebration, and let himself acknowledge the truth he'd been trying to ignore. He hadn't just cared about Elena as his daughter's caregiver. He'd fallen in love with her. And he'd just destroyed them all. Emma knew something was wrong the moment she came home Sunday afternoon. The house felt different, empty in a way that had nothing to do with how many people were in it. She clutched Hoppy to her chest and looked around the foyer with wide, searching eyes. Where's Lena? She asked, her small voice echoing in the cavernous space. Alexander knelt down, forcing himself to meet his daughter's gaze. He'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times, but the words still stuck in his throat. Elena had to go away, sweetheart. She had a family emergency. When is she coming back? She's not coming back, Emma. The little girl's face crumpled, her bottom lip trembling. But she didn't say goodbye. She always says goodbye. It happened very suddenly. She asked me to tell you she's sorry.
No.
Emma shook her head violently. No, Daddy, she wouldn't leave without saying goodbye. She promised she wouldn't leave me. She promised. The accusation in his daughter's voice cut deeper than any blade. Alexander reached for her, but Emma jerked away, tears streaming down her face. I want Lena. I want my Lena. Her voice rose to a wail, and she ran for the stairs, her sobs echoing through the house. Alexander stood alone in the foyer, the sound of his daughter's heartbreak ringing in his ears, and questioned everything. The next days were a living nightmare. Emma refused to eat, barely spoke, and cried herself to sleep every night. The new nanny, a highly recommended professional named Miss Catherine, was efficient and kind, but Emma wanted nothing to do with her. She'd go silent when Miss Catherine entered a room, turning her face to the wall and clutching Hoppy like a lifeline. By Wednesday, Emma had stopped speaking entirely. By Friday, she'd stopped eating anything more than a few bites per meal. Alexander watched his daughter disappearing back into herself, all the progress of the past months evaporating like morning dew. Mrs. Patterson confronted him in his study on Saturday morning, her expression thunderous. This has to stop, she said without preamble. That child is breaking, Mr. Winters, and you're letting it happen. I'm protecting her. From what? From someone who loves her? I don't know what happened between you and Elena, but I know that girl would cut off her own arm before she'd harm Emma. There are things you don't know, Mrs. Patterson. Things about Elena's past. I know she changed her name after escaping an abusive marriage. I know she's been sending money to support a nephew she saved from a dangerous situation. I know she's been looking over her shoulder for 7 years, terrified that her past would find her. Mrs. Patterson's voice was hard. I also know that none of that changes the fact that she loves Emma like a daughter, and Emma loves her like a mother. Alexander stared at her. You knew? Elena told me everything 3 months ago. She was terrified you'd find out and fire her, but she didn't want to keep secrets from me. I'm probably the only person in the world who knew her full story. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened slightly. She was going to tell you, Alexander. She'd been gathering the courage for weeks. She wanted you to know the truth because she cared about you too much to keep lying. The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. Elena had been planning to tell him. She hadn't been content to keep her secrets. She'd been preparing to be vulnerable and honest with him. And he'd thrown her out before she'd had the chance. I've made a terrible mistake, he whispered. Yes, you have. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Alexander's phone buzzed before he could answer. A text from his lawyer. Call me immediately. We have a problem. 20 minutes later, Alexander was in his car, driving toward his lawyer's office with a sick feeling in his stomach. The problem, it turned out, was Victoria. His sister had filed for emergency custody of Emma, citing his inappropriate relationship with household staff and failure to properly vet dangerous individuals around his daughter. It's a long shot, his lawyer said. But Victoria has money and connections, and she's painting a picture of instability. If this goes to court, they're going to question your judgment. The fact that you fired Elena looks good for your case, but Victoria is arguing you should have never hired her in the first place. This is insane. Victoria's never shown any interest in Emma. She's arguing that's because you've kept her away. Look, Alexander, I can fight this. But you need to be prepared for this to get ugly. They're going to dig into everything: your mental state after Caroline died, your parenting decisions, your household management. Every mistake will be examined and magnified. Alexander left the office in a daze. His sister was trying to take Emma away. His daughter was shutting down. And Elena, the woman who'd brought them both back to life, was gone, probably thinking he hated her. When he got home, he found Emma sitting in her playroom, staring at a drawing she and Elena had made together. She didn't look up when he entered. Emma, sweetheart, we need to talk. Nothing. His daughter sat motionless, barely breathing. I know you're angry with me. I know you miss Elena. I miss her too. Still nothing. Alexander sat down beside her, his heart breaking. I made a mistake, Emma. A really big one. I was scared, and when people are scared, sometimes they do stupid things. I pushed away someone we both love because I was trying to protect you, but I ended up hurting you instead. Emma's small hand tightened around her crayon. Elena didn't want to leave. I made her leave. And I'm so sorry for that. Finally, Emma turned to look at him. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. You promised no one else would leave. You promised, Daddy. The words shattered something in Alexander's chest. He'd made that promise a year ago, holding his grieving daughter while she sobbed for her mother. He'd told her that he would always be there, that they would get through this together, that he wouldn't let anyone else leave them. And then he'd sent Elena away. I broke my promise, he said, his own voice breaking. And I'm going to fix it. I don't know how yet, but I'm going to bring Elena back. Because you're right, she's family. And family doesn't give up on each other. Emma studied him for a long moment, searching his face for truth. Then she picked up a crayon and wrote 3 shaky words on her drawing. She is my mommy. The words hit Alexander like lightning. In Emma's simple, 4-year-old logic, she'd identified what he'd been too afraid to acknowledge. Elena wasn't just a nanny or a friend. She was the mother Emma had needed, the partner Alexander had been afraid to want, the piece that had made their broken family whole again. You're right, Alexander whispered, gathering his daughter close.
She is.
And I'm going to bring her home. But when he tried to find Elena, she'd vanished. Her phone was disconnected. Her emergency contact information led to a voicemail that was never answered. She'd left no forwarding address, no trace of where she might have gone. Alexander spent 3 days calling in every favor, hiring investigators, searching desperately for any lead. Nothing. Elena had done what she'd apparently been trained to do, disappear without a trace. On the 4th day, Mrs. Patterson found him in his study at 2 a.m, surrounded by dead ends and cold trails. You're not going to find her this way, the housekeeper said gently. Then how? Mrs. Patterson, Emma's not eating. She's not talking. And Victoria's lawyers are building a case that I'm an unfit father. I need to fix this, but I don't know how. Maybe you need to stop trying to control everything and start being vulnerable. Elena didn't run because you fired her. She ran because you broke her heart. If you want to find her, you need to show her that coming back won't mean getting hurt again. But how do I do that when I can't even find her? Mrs. Patterson smiled sadly. You make sure that when she does look back, and she will because she loves Emma too much not to, she sees something worth returning for. You make a public declaration that you are wrong. You fight Victoria not by hiding what happened, but by being honest about it. You show Elena that you're brave enough to be as vulnerable as she was. It was risky. It was terrifying. It went against every instinct Alexander had to protect his privacy and maintain control. But for Emma, for Elena, he would do it. Alexander called a press conference for Monday morning. His PR team was horrified, his lawyer was apoplectic, and Victoria was already threatening legal action. But Alexander had learned something important. Love was worth more than reputation, and family mattered more than public opinion. The conference room was packed with reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers. Alexander stood at the podium, his prepared statement crumpled in his hands. In the end, he ignored it completely and spoke from his heart. 3 years ago, I lost my wife to a tragic accident. It destroyed me in ways I'm still discovering. But worse than my own grief was watching my daughter grieve, watching her withdraw from the world, seeing the light go out in her eyes. I hired specialists, therapists, highly trained nannies. Nothing helped. My daughter was drowning, and I couldn't reach her. He paused, looking directly into the cameras. 9 months ago, I hired a young woman named Elena Martinez to care for Emma. She had no fancy degrees, no experience with elite families. What she had was a heart capable of fierce, unconditional love. Within weeks, my daughter was laughing again. Within months, she was thriving. Elena gave Emma something I couldn't. Not because I didn't love my daughter enough, but because some wounds require a different kind of healing. Alexander's voice roughened with emotion. Last week, I learned that Elena had changed her name years ago after escaping an abusive marriage. She'd been protecting a nephew from her ex-husband's criminal associates. When I discovered this, I reacted out of fear and suspicion. I fired her without giving her a chance to explain, without trusting in the woman I'd come to know over those 9 months. A murmur ran through the crowd. This was not the sanitized corporate statement they'd expected. I made a terrible mistake. Elena Martinez is not a threat to my daughter. She's the woman who saved her. Emma stopped speaking after her mother died. Elena taught her to find her voice again. Emma stopped playing, stopped creating, stopped engaging with the world. Elena showed her it was safe to live again. And me? I was just existing, going through the motions of life, without really being present. Elena reminded me what it meant to actually live. Alexander's hands gripped the podium. My sister is currently seeking custody of my daughter, arguing that I'm an unfit parent. She's probably right that I've made mistakes. But the biggest mistake I made was sending away the person Emma needs most. My daughter told me something a few days ago that broke my heart. She's my mommy. Those were her words. And she's right. The room erupted with questions, but Alexander held up a hand. Elena, if you're watching this, I was wrong. I let fear make me cruel, and I hurt you when you'd done nothing but love us. I don't know if you can forgive me, but Emma needs you. I need you. And I'm asking you, begging you, to please come home. Not as an employee, but as family. As the mother Emma has chosen. As the woman I've fallen in love with. The last sentence escaped before Alexander could stop it, but he didn't regret it. The truth had been building in him for months, unacknowledged but undeniable. I'm not asking you to forget what I did or to pretend it didn't hurt. I'm just asking for a chance to prove that I'm capable of being as brave as you've been, as loving as you've been, as open-hearted as you've taught Emma to be. Please, Elena, come home. The press conference exploded into chaos, but Alexander barely noticed. He'd said what needed to be said. The rest was up to Elena. The video went viral within hours. Alexander's raw emotion, his public vulnerability, his confession of love. It was the kind of story that captured hearts. Social media exploded with people sharing their own stories of found families and second chances. Within 24 hours, #BringElenaHome was trending worldwide. But there was still no word from Elena herself. Emma watched the video with Mrs. Patterson, tears streaming down her small face. Daddy said the truth, she whispered. He said Lena is my mommy. He did, sweet girl. Now we just have to wait and hope she comes back. She will, Emma said with a certainty that made Mrs. Patterson's eyes sting. The stars still connect us. She told me, no matter how far apart we are, the stars connect us. 3 days passed. Alexander barely slept, barely ate, jumping every time his phone rang. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following week, and his lawyer was frantically building a defense. But Alexander found he didn't care about the legal battle. All he cared about was Emma's hollow eyes and the empty space in their lives where Elena had been. On Thursday evening, Alexander was in Emma's room, reading her a bedtime story neither of them was really listening to, when Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway. Mr. Winters, she said, and something in her voice made him look up. There's someone here to see you. Alexander's heart stopped. He looked at Mrs. Patterson, afraid to hope, and saw tears in the older woman's eyes. Should I? He couldn't finish the question. Emma should come too, Mrs. Patterson said softly. They walked down the stairs together, Emma clutching his hand tightly. As they rounded the corner into the foyer, Alexander saw her. Elena stood just inside the door, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, her hands twisting together nervously. She looked thinner, more fragile than he remembered, but when she saw Emma, her face transformed with such love that Alexander felt his breath catch. Lena. Emma's voice broke the stillness, and then she was running, her small feet pounding across the marble floor. Elena dropped to her knees and caught the little girl in her arms, both of them sobbing. I'm so sorry, sweet girl. I'm so sorry I left without saying goodbye. I'm so sorry. You came back, Emma said between sobs. I knew you would. The stars kept us connected. You promised. I promised, Elena agreed, holding Emma like she'd never let go. And I should have fought harder to keep that promise. I should have trusted that your daddy would understand if I just explained properly. I was scared, but that's no excuse. Over Emma's head, Elena's eyes met Alexander's. He saw fear there and hope and love so intense it made him ache. I saw your press conference, Elena said quietly. I've watched it about 100 times. You said things I never expected to hear. I meant every word. Alexander moved closer, his movements slow and careful, afraid of spooking her. Elena, I'm so sorry. I should have listened. I should have trusted in the person you'd shown me you were, not judged you based on circumstances I didn't understand. You were protecting your daughter. I understand that. I was protecting myself, Alexander corrected. I was scared of caring about you too much, of losing another person I loved. So when I found out you'd kept secrets, I used it as an excuse to push you away before you could leave on your own terms. That was cowardice, not protection. Elena stood, lifting Emma with her. The little girl wrapped herself around Elena like a koala, her face buried in her shoulder. I kept secrets because I was scared too, Elena admitted. Scared you'd judge my past, scared you'd think I was dangerous, scared you'd fire me, and I'd lose Emma. I should have been brave enough to trust you with the truth. So we're both cowards who hurt each other by trying not to get hurt, Alexander said with a sad smile. That's a terrible foundation for a relationship. Good thing we're starting over then. Elena shifted Emma to one hip, freeing a hand that she held out to Alexander. Elena Martinez, formerly Elena Vargas. I'm 28 years old. I escaped an abusive marriage 7 years ago after my husband murdered my little brother. I changed my name and moved across the country with my nephew, who I'm raising with help from my mother. I've spent every day since trying to build a life where violence doesn't define me. And somewhere along the way, I fell in love with a man and his daughter who taught me that it's okay to want a family again. Alexander took her hand, his grip firm and sure. Alexander Winters, 37 years old. Widower, father, and until recently, a man who'd forgotten how to actually live. I'm terrified of losing people I love, and I sometimes make terrible decisions based on that fear. But I'm learning, slowly, that being vulnerable is worth the risk. And I'm completely in love with the woman who taught me that. Emma lifted her head from Elena's shoulder, looking between them with swollen but hopeful eyes. Does this mean Lena can stay forever? If she'll have us, Alexander said, his gaze never leaving Elena's face. Not as an employee, but as part of our family. However that looks, whatever form it takes. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow or to replace Caroline or to fit some predetermined role. I'm just asking you to stay, to be with us, to let us love you the way you've loved us. Elena's eyes filled with fresh tears. I would like nothing more. But there's something you should know. My past might always be complicated. There might always be some risk that Miguel's associates could find me. I can't promise you perfect safety. Life doesn't come with perfect safety, Alexander replied. Caroline and I thought we had decades ahead of us, and we got 3 years. I've learned that the only real mistake is not loving people while we have the chance. So yes, there might be risks. We'll face them together. Together, Elena repeated, testing the word. Then she smiled, a real, radiant smile that lit up her whole face. I like the sound of that. Emma, still perched on Elena's hip, reached out to Alexander. He stepped forward, and suddenly the three of them were embracing in the middle of the foyer, holding each other like they could merge into one unbreakable unit. You're my mommy, Emma said into Elena's shoulder. I told Daddy. I wrote it down and everything. Elena looked at Alexander, questions in her eyes. She did, he confirmed. And she was right. You might not have given birth to her, but you're her mother in every way that matters. Is that okay with you? Elena asked, her voice small. I would never try to replace. Caroline would have loved you, Alexander interrupted gently. She would have been grateful that Emma found someone who loves her so completely. And she would want me to be happy again. You're not replacing her, Elena. You're creating something new with us. Mrs. Patterson appeared with a tray of tea, her eyes suspiciously bright. I believe a celebration is in order. Perhaps some cocoa for Miss Emma, and a proper conversation for the adults after bedtime? The evening that followed was gentle and healing. They tucked Emma into bed together, Elena on one side and Alexander on the other, reading her favorite stories. When Emma finally drifted off to sleep, her hand clasped in Elena's, they sat in the dim light of the bedside lamp and talked. Elena told Alexander everything, the full story of her marriage to Miguel, the gradual realization of what he was involved in, the desperate decision to threaten going to the police. She described finding Antonio's body, the terror of fleeing with his young son, the years of looking over her shoulder. She talked about the guilt she carried for not protecting her brother and the fierce determination to give his son the life Antonio never got to have. Alexander listened without interruption, holding her hand as she relived her trauma. When she finished, he lifted her hand to his lips. "You are the strongest person I've ever met," he said. "And the bravest. Thank you for trusting me with this. I should have told you months ago. You told me when you were ready. That's all that matters." They talked for hours, rebuilding trust brick by careful brick. They discussed practicalities, Elena moving into the guest suite rather than the staff quarters, her officially adopting Emma if that's what they all wanted, the custody battle with Victoria, and how they'd face it together. They talked about the future, about what their unconventional family might look like, about dreams and fears and hopes. As dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they were still talking. Still planning. Still healing. "I love you," Alexander said as the first rays of sun touched Elena's face. "I should have said it before, but fear got in the way. I won't make that mistake again." "I love you too," Elena replied. "Both of you. I have for months, but I was terrified to admit it even to myself." "No more fear," Alexander promised. "Or, at least, no more letting fear make our decisions for us." "No more fear," Elena agreed. When Emma woke an hour later and padded into the master suite where they'd fallen asleep in chairs by the window, she found them still holding hands, both smiling despite their exhaustion. "Lena stayed," she said with satisfaction, climbing into Elena's lap. "I knew she would." "I'm never leaving again," Elena promised. "Not unless you and your daddy come with me." "Deal," Emma said seriously, then grinned. "Can we have pancakes for breakfast? The special ones you make with the chocolate chips?" "Absolutely. But first, I think your daddy and I need about 20 minutes of sleep." "I'll keep watch," Emma announced, "to make sure no one bothers you." And she did, standing guard over the two people she loved most in the world, her small face serious with the weight of her self-appointed duty. When Mrs. Patterson found them an hour later, she took a photo that would eventually hang in a place of honor in their home. Alexander and Elena asleep in their chairs, hands intertwined, and Emma standing between them like a small guardian angel, her stuffed rabbit held tight. The custody battle with Victoria was settled out of court 2 weeks later. Alexander's lawyer presented evidence of Emma's deterioration after Elena's departure and her dramatic recovery upon Elena's return, along with testimony from child psychologists about the importance of maintaining Emma's primary attachment figure. Victoria, faced with overwhelming evidence that her case was baseless and damaging publicity from Alexander's viral press conference, withdrew her petition. 6 months later, on a perfect autumn day, Alexander and Elena were married in the mansion's gardens. Emma served as the flower girl, wearing a dress she and Elena had picked out together, scattering petals with solemn importance. The ceremony was small, just close friends, loyal staff, and Elena's nephew Antonio Jr. and her mother, who cried through the entire event. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, Emma's voice rang out clear and bright. "I object. You forgot to say the important part." The guests laughed, but Emma was serious. She marched up to the front and tugged on the officiant's sleeve. You have to say that Lena is my mommy now. That's the most important part. Elena knelt down, tears streaming down her face. I am your mommy, sweet girl. I always will be. But your first mommy, Caroline, she's still your mommy too. You get to have both of us loving you, okay? One in your life and one in your heart.
Emma thought about this, then nodded.
I like that. Two mommies is even better than one. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Later, as they danced under strings of lights while stars emerged overhead, Elena whispered to Alexander, "Did you ever imagine this? That day you hired me?" "No," he admitted. "I thought I was just getting help with Emma. I never imagined I was inviting someone in who would change everything." "Changed for the better?" Elena asked, a hint of teasing in her voice. "Changed for the better," Alexander confirmed, pulling her closer. "You gave me back my daughter and gave me a future I'd stopped believing in. That's more than better. That's miraculous." The miracle was already here, Elena said, looking over at Emma, who was dancing with Mrs. Patterson, both of them giggling. "I just helped you see it." As the night wore on and guests departed, the new family of three sat together on the terrace steps, looking up at the stars. Emma was nestled between them, drowsy but fighting sleep. "Lena," she murmured, "you were right about the stars." "What do you mean, sweet girl?" "You said they connect us even when we're apart. But now we don't have to be apart anymore, so they can just connect all of us together. Like a constellation." "That's beautiful," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. "Our own constellation." "The Winters Martinez constellation," Emma announced, as if making it official. Then she yawned. "Can we come look at it every night? So we always remember we're connected?" "Every single night," Alexander promised. And they did. Years later, long after Emma had grown, after Elena had officially adopted her, and after they'd added 2 more children to their constellation, they still maintained the tradition. On clear nights, they'd gather on the terrace and look up at the stars, remembering the grief that had brought them together and the love that had made them whole. The story of the maid who became a mother, of the billionaire who learned to be vulnerable, and of the little girl who knew that love could come in many forms, it became part of their family mythology, told and retold at gatherings, embellished and cherished. But the core truth never changed, that sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about romance at all. They're about finding family in unexpected places, about choosing to be brave when fear would be easier, and about recognizing that the people who heal us are often the ones we're meant to keep forever. In the end, Elena hadn't just saved Emma from her grief. She'd saved all of them, from their loneliness, their fear, their inability to imagine that joy could follow sorrow. She'd walked into a house full of ghosts and pain and, with nothing more than an open heart and fierce determination, had transformed it into a home. And every night, when they looked up at the stars, they saw not just distant balls of gas, but proof of Elena's wisdom, that love, real love, connects us across every distance, transcends every loss, and endures through every storm. 3 hearts, once broken, now beat as one. A family not born, but chosen. A love not easy, but earned. And under the endless sky, with stars bearing witness, they lived not just happily ever after, but deeply, messily, beautifully alive.